Hello and welcome to Claer Barrett's Business Clinic live on ft.com. I'm coming at you from my living room in Hackney in East London, and I'm joined today by my FT colleague Andy Bounds, the enterprise editor, who is in the northwest of England. But even though we are both broadcasting this live from our separate living rooms in different parts of the UK, for this business clinic, we're really hoping that we can hear from people who are reading the FT around the world. We're getting such a good international audience for these videos with our followers on YouTube and on LinkedIn. And you often comment to say hello as we're talking about quite UK-centric aspects of the government's recovery package. Well, today we're throwing it open to you. We want to talk about how businesses everywhere around the world are looking to rebuild. What is the strategy that you as a small business are looking to put in place as we emerge from this period of lockdown? Are you, like millions of other businesses, looking to keep more of your business online if you have shifted it online during the lockdown period? Are you hoping that this trend for localism and supporting local businesses while people have been stuck in their home communities will continue when people can go back to work? And what are the things that you are doing to turn around your business? This has been a really harrowing period for anybody running a small business. We've had to make changes quickly, we've had to deal with huge financial pressures and learn new skills, adapt and be resilient. It would be wonderful to hear some good news from companies out there about the challenges and how they've overcome them and the successes they've had. So if you want to speak to us, I have my trusty iPad here. If you comment on the story in ft.com, that will get to me. If you want to make a comment in the YouTube live feed, that will also get to me and Andy. And also, if you're watching on LinkedIn, similarly, if you make a comment there, we can read it out. So, Andy, I'll bring you in at this point. I mean, more than a third of companies in the UK have told us that their response to the coronavirus has been that they've massively accelerated their online presence.
Yeah, I mean, first we have to say congratulations to anybody who's still in business out there during this, really tough time. There's been remarkable ingenuity showed by so many small business people, probably doing things they didn't even realize they could do. And online is one of the biggest ones. So many people are now dealing directly with their customers rather than, possibly through intermediaries, or they're a shop that's not able to people to get in, so they're delivering. And that's been a really big feature of this, and I suspect that many of them will want to continue that relationship with their customers afterwards, because it's a great one to have.
Now, we've also heard lots of stories, both reported in the FT and elsewhere, about small manufacturing businesses that have adapted to the changing needs. For example, gin distilleries, which are now making hand sanitizer. And then again, on a kind of a more slightly homespun level, look at all of the people on Etsy who are selling cloth face masks and other coverings, which we now have to wear in the UK on public transport. This one was made by a lovely lady called Sarah Jane, who before the pandemic was making makeup bags and scarves. And she has turned things around and is now doing a roaring trade selling masks. And like you say, Andy, small businesses, entrepreneurs, they can adapt very fast.
Yeah, that's right, and with a minimum investment as well. I think the hand sanitizer, it goes so wide. I'm pleased to see you didn't try and attempt to drink that from the gin distillery, but
things haven't got that bad yet.
They're still making gin, of course, as well. But yeah, I mean, lots and lots of. I mean, I've come across mattress makers that are now doing PPE, masks and gloves and things like that, and aprons. Clothing suppliers that have moved into that, and there really is the most incredible ingenuity out there. And I think there has also, as you said earlier, been a sort of feeling among a lot of people they want to support their local businesses as well. I think I'm doing a lot more trading with grocery deliveries and farm shop deliveries, trying to source books from my local bookshop, which often put in the post or just push through the door. As opposed to going online, because people feel you actually realize what you might be missing if some of these businesses do go under. And obviously next week in the UK, at least, many retailers will be allowed to open their doors again on Monday. We'll have to see how that goes, because in a way that entails some cost for them in terms of having to get social distancing measures and hand sanitizer in place. but the shops that have traded so far, I think, have found it reasonably okay to handle that. You know, certainly bakeries and things like that that have been going throughout the pandemic, I think have done okay. Butcher shops, so on. So there's encouragement for others out there who are preparing to reopen.
And I would just stress again, people who are watching the video live, do tell us about your experiences. We've had a comment already from JS Fun Event Hire. Obviously, events businesses hit particularly hard during this lockdown. They say they normally hire games for outdoor events. And to Andy's point on how businesses are adapting for the new social distancing measures, they've introduced a foot pedal powered hand-free sanitizer so that people who are participating in their events can put on hand sanitizer without infecting others. They've also said it's not just about sales, though. Talking about solutions like this has given us a genuine reason to open discussions with our clients. Well, thank you very much. We would like to hear from other businesses around the world, not just in the UK, about how you will be operating and facing the financial challenge of still making a profit, we hope, with the social distancing measures in place. Now, Andy, one thing which business people are saying to you is really crucial to future profitability is whether the social distancing distance between people should be 2 meters or 1 meter. And for a business like a restaurant, that could be make or break.
Yeah, it's a fascinating debate being had, especially in the UK at the moment. The UK cabinet has so far gone for 2 meter distance. I think the WHO talks about a 1 meter being mandatory. Many other countries have gone for 1 or 1.5 meters. And of course, if you think about the way things work, if you're going 2 meters in each direction in a restaurant, that's a huge amount of space that you're eating up. And therefore, if you reduce that to 1, I think you're actually quadrupling the amount of people you can get in. So for some people, it's the difference between getting a sort of 20% audience and up to 70, 80%, which is, no restaurant can make a profit, I don't think, based on a 20, 25% of their restaurant being used all the time. You can combine it with some takeaway. You can adjust a bit by maybe having counter order rather than waiter service, which allows you to squeeze more people in. So it's a really vital debate. And I certainly think in the UK, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we moved towards 1 meter before too long. That's certainly all the noises coming out of the government and some of the hints that they've been dropping to the media. But it'd be interesting to know what other places in the world are doing and how that's working for them. There's obviously the question of outdoor space as well. We're fortunate in the UK; we've had some decent weather, so table service outside is possible. And again, in many countries, that will be far easier, and there'll be more set up for that as well.
Well, certainly the good weather is going to be dependent on a lot of pubs in the UK being able to make some money over the summer. They're going to be allowed, the government has said, to have an outdoor service. Certainly a lot of the pubs around here where I live have been adapting. They're already open selling takeaway beer and cocktails if they're on the side of a park. For example, they've got social distancing measures in place with the queues, and that is one way that these businesses in the UK are adapting. But maybe you're watching this and you're a publican. Do join in the debate. We'd love to hear from you. Or you're running a business anywhere in the world. We've got some great comments here, Andy. I'll read out a few for you. Kimo Sabi has contacted us via Twitter to say that he's operating his business with as much frugality as possible. Cash flow is all that matters now. Well, certainly, I think that is a sentiment that many of our readers would share. Rodney Mills from LinkedIn, hello to everybody on LinkedIn, says moving everything online in the hospitality industry from Zoom conferences and most staff now working from home. He says it's a new world out there. We will only survive if we adapt. A sentiment, again, I'm sure will be shared by many. Zark Muckerberg, not his real name, I think, on YouTube, says, I started a business producing stationery equipment prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. However, I've pivoted my business to prototyping when the lockdown came into force. And since then, we've been using 3D printing at home. Well, I find that fascinating, Andy. The world of 3D printing has just opened up so many avenues for small businesses. It really has.
Yeah. I've come across some remarkable examples, and there's a very good advanced manufacturing centre in Sheffield, which works with many top places like Boeing, but they've also been involved with the ventilator challenge in the UK, which is trying to create a new stream of ventilators. And a lot of that work was done online, and then the prototypes was done in 3D printing in small workshops or in people's houses. And then they all came together when they had to actually build it. But it showed what was possible. And the chap who was talking to me talked about the origins of manufacturing in, particularly in Sheffield, where they had small workshops and people worked for themselves, and they passed the piece of cutlery or the thing they were making from one workshop to the other. And each was specialized in a particular bit of the process. So he was saying, actually, this idea of manufacturing at home, we all think of factories nowadays and they need to have lots of people in one place. That's only the very last bit of the journey. So an awful lot of the research, an awful lot of the prototyping can be done exactly as your correspondent's doing it. And I think that will be, we don't have to think manufacturing is finished in an age of social distancing. It can still flourish. I think there was an interesting question as well about the cash flow, because one thing that does worry me a little bit is people thinking, whatever comes of this, the economy is going to take a while to get back to normal, and a lot of the support measures will eventually be withdrawn. So you've got to be in a shape to survive that withdrawal, and you may be trading again, but you may be trading at social distancing with its added costs. And therefore, I think he's quite right or she's quite right to keep cash flow central to you. Think anything you don't have to spend, don't spend it at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on that point, our local bookshop in Hackney, which is called Pages, they've never been busier in terms of the amount of orders that they're getting coming in online. They've adapted, they've changed their website so that people can order directly, but also emailing them. And the wonderful thing about this story is that so many people locally want to support independent traders, but for all of the extra work that they're having to do packaging up those books, it's not so easy that the customers are just walking into the shop and buying them. They've got to be distributed, ordered from the manufacturer, from the publisher, perhaps, and sent out. So the level of profitability, although the revenue is higher, has unfortunately not kept pace with that. And I think that is the case for many, many businesses who've been able to trade, albeit differently, through the pandemic, but are finding that the cost of doing business has gone up, partially offset by help from the government, business rates, holidays, as you've said, etc., etc. So I'm just going to read out one comment from Nazmul Hassan Shawan, who is from Bangladesh. Hi, I'm from Bangladesh. He's commenting via LinkedIn. If possible, please could we discuss how businesses can reshape in this pandemic, and on what points should new entrepreneurs focus? Well, maybe we can get a bit of a discussion going. If you want to suggest what you think new entrepreneurs should be focusing on with their businesses, then do comment via the usual channels. Andy, I'll ask you for your views on that in a second, but we are getting an awful lot of comments coming in about finance, understandably, which is obviously a crucial plank of how businesses are responding to the challenges, how they are financing any new initiatives that they are trying. Now, for example, Brown Sheep of Bank Street on ft.com, I love all of these reader pseudonyms. He says it would be fantastic to hear from FT readers about how the bounce back loan or the coronavirus business impact loans, they're the government backed loans that you can get if you're a business in the UK, have been used by participating companies to reconfigure their business models. Brilliant point, Brown Sheep. If you're out there and you've had a bounce back or a Sybil's and you've used that to reconfigure your business, if you want to shout out, get commenting on that story now. Also, he says, are we moving closer to a cashless society or even an e-commerce only society? Again, both great points. Andy, what do you think to those?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that so many trends which were starting, such as the use of cards over cash, such as, trading online, have been massively accelerated by this pandemic, which is often what happens in a global crisis. New forms of doing business emerge. And whether we like it or not, and I think a lot of people, are very wedded to cash, and cash will always need to be accepted in places because, certain businesses need to have the cash, and also there can be costs associated with both cash, but also with card fees and so on. I mean, cards are, they have become the default mechanism. And I mean, I was looking at the reopening. The other thing is the end of paper. You know, I was looking at the reopening of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which is a very big holiday resort, you know, in northwest England, and they are going totally, you know, phone ticket only, smart ticket only. You know, football grounds will presumably be doing the same. You know, so many events, and this is in the UK where that's already a trend. Imagine around the rest of the world where they still might be, you know, a bit further back and relying on paper and cash. It's a massive change, and the mobile phone has become, you know, the means of payment, the means of communication, the means of ordering, the means of buying stuff. It's just incredible.
And also, even more imperative that you carry around a mobile charger
yeah.
for your mobile phone, because if you're out and about and you run out of battery, all of a sudden you've got a problem, because we really are using it for everything. Couple of comments coming in. The Whitstable Produce Store have tweeted to say, we've rebuilt our business in the UK little by little. We've swapped from being a cafe and takeaway to takeaway only, having closed for a couple of weeks to sort things out. Currently doing well, glad to hear it. We've unfurloughed the team, even gladder to hear that. And we are glad to be able to support the small businesses who supply us, which is a great point, because obviously the whole supply chain is dependent on different businesses reopening with a degree of success. It's, you know, if they succeed, the suppliers will succeed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's an example around me of a home delivery meat service where they deal with local farmers, and obviously the demand has gone through the roof, and these farmers are suddenly having to produce more sheep and cows, which you can't do overnight. So they're having to find them elsewhere or work with other farmers. And obviously, until then, a lot of people are very reliant on feeding into the supermarket food chain. So again, you know, you might pivot your business towards home delivery and supplying a local home deliverer, but then what happens after the pandemic? Do people switch back to the supermarket? So you've got to be very nimble and agile and prepared to change to where the demand goes. The other thing I think is interesting about cafes and so on is, you know, if there'll be more home working, will cafes tend to migrate to where people live rather than where they work? You know, at the moment, the City of London is full of takeaways and cafes, but hardly anybody lives there. If you're running if you're running one of those, are you going to be more exposed to a downturn in trade than if you're actually operating in, you know, suburbs of London where people now might think, well, I'll work from home today and I'll go and get my lunch at the local cafe. So there'll be different impacts according to where you're based.
I think that's a really good point, Andy. And I would add to that somewhat smugly that during this lockdown, my household has only consumed 2 takeaways since the middle of March. Now, if you consider that, you know, in a bad week, it might be 2 a week before that, just because of the endless hours that the FT has us working and coming in late, being disorganized with the food shop, etc., etc. You know, that is definitely having an impact. We're keen to support our local businesses, and you know, they are open again now, and certainly you know, takeaway coffees and takeaway lunches are a thing. If home working becomes the norm for many of us, then yes, certainly breaking up your day by having a lunch out seems like a great idea to me. We're getting some really good comments coming in from overseas. Jane Coe on LinkedIn says, hi from Singapore. Hi, Jane. I'm in the interior design business. Several suppliers are now introducing shields for restaurants and the hospitality industry in Singapore. I've also seen developments in sanitizing and health screen scanning as well. Fantastic. Thank you for mentioning that. Clearly a big area that many businesses will be looking to both expand into from a manufacturing point of view and buy from a client point of view. Murak Darbar on YouTube also says, when we were in clothes and fashion manufacturing, 50% of our machinists were working from home. In relation to your last point, Andy, it was easier with piecework. However, with the new structure, this may be a little difficult. Well, very interesting, Mubarak, to get your insight on that. Then we have some comments about the question that we had from our reader in Bangladesh for advice for new entrepreneurs. Syed Akdast Ahmed on LinkedIn says, I agree with Claire and Andy. Well, fantastic. Your comment was going to be guaranteed to be read out. To be successful in the medium term, a well thought out hybrid model of physical and online presence is vital for the majority of businesses. You need human contact, be it physical or online. get ready to have a super website and fund it effectively and continuously to be noticed. I mean, that is a really good point, and I suspect that a lot of the money from the bounce back loans and other money that has been borrowed has been sunk into improving websites and online ordering capabilities, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still sometimes amazed at, how poor some small business websites can be. I mean, most of them are really getting there now, and they've got social media presence and everything. But sometimes I'm researching a story, and somebody will say, "Oh, have you thought about, covering so and so?" And you go on their website, and you're like, you can't figure out what they do or who runs it, or you can't even get a contact number. So, yeah, that doesn't take much. You don't even need some great consultancy. A lot of the stuff you could do yourself. So make sure your website is there, it stands out. I think the about section is really important. It's who you are, why you're doing this. Really engages people if they're already looking to trade, maybe with somebody local or independent. That's really important to people. And I think the other thing to say is you mentioned the example of Singapore. I mean, anybody who's in other places in the world, look at the places that are coming out of lockdown. What businesses are thriving, how are they adapting, how are people spending their money. Drive-through cinemas is a big thing that's coming, I think, back to the UK, and I know a lot of country houses, airports, using their runways. And then that's turned into, I mean, I think Germany's got drive-through raves where people sit in their car and watch DJs go. So if you're an events business, can you pivot towards the drive-through? And how does that work?
Well, drive-through raves, you heard it first on ft.com. I have got another comment here from Trevor Parsons, who's in Belfast. Hi, Trevor. He's commenting via LinkedIn. He says, I'm helping a large manufacturer get back to some level of production by introducing social distancing to allow them to produce PPE for the health service sector. Their normal product range, sportswear, disappeared, and they had to furlough just about all of their 750 workers. This is the new normal. Well, again, a very powerful example there of how there's huge demand for some things in the wake of the pandemic, PPE, and demand for other things has just vanished.
Yeah. I think as well, if you're in these fields, like you've turned yourself into a PPE manufacturer, you have to work with local politicians and so on as well to make sure that business is going to exist for the next few years. Because the danger here is, the NHS, for example, in the UK suddenly needs lots and lots of supplies, and everybody starts manufacturing for them. And then a year's time, the pandemic's gone. Oh, well, we'll switch back to sourcing again from China or wherever else. So I think this needs to be coupled with talking to your local representatives, especially your MPs or whatever, whichever country you're in, about what you're doing and about what you need to thrive in the future. Because most politicians want to help the economy. And I do think there's a danger that everything, a lot of things sort of snap back to how they were, and people get left a little bit high and dry. So it's important that people understand the needs for some long-term thinking on how to reshape the economy as well. And that includes things like investment in broadband. We talk about people going online. Some people can't go online, in many, even parts of London, let alone rural areas, the connection is just not good enough. So, we really need a lot of investment in broadband capability to ensure that everybody's able to do that.
Well, in reference to your earlier comment about websites, is your website visible on a mobile phone? Is a good point that's been made, because you were saying earlier, Andy, more and more of us are using our mobile phones to do everything. You might have a website that's visible on a desktop, but if it's not compatible with a mobile phone, that is not a good thing. I'm sorry, I've lost the very good comment that somebody wrote about that, saying it was right to invest in IT consultancy if you needed it. Probably an IT consultant. But anyway, moving on, we have a question here from Shas Abulhameen on LinkedIn. He says, do you think there's an opportunity for businesses to be more sustainable and do more for climate post-COVID? Now, thank you, Shas, for that question. I think it's really interesting, because one of the things that breaks my heart about all of the different measures that we're having to take on in response to the pandemic is the amount of plastic that sadly is having to be involved in some of these things, which is why I've got my cloth mask rather than a plastic alternative. but certainly all of the bars and restaurants, takeaways, awful lot of plastic being used there. Some are using more sustainable equipment to do that. But I think that in general, Andy, would you share my view that businesses generally are becoming more concerned about the environment and climate change as a result of COVID-19 and the sort of wider awareness of how much these issues can affect our world?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that the localism, people have felt this localism and looking after your local suppliers and looking after your local traders, and that they look after their local suppliers. That has become a cutting edge marketing tool as well. If you're green, I think you will be able to charge higher prices, and you'll have more interest in your products, especially among the younger generation. I think your point about plastic is well made, because I don't see how we get around this. It's going to have to be disposable portions of ketchup in restaurants. It's already, in the supermarket, when you used to have all your croissants, openly on display, they're all wrapped up in plastic. And I mean, it's such an irony that, we were talking about how to get rid of plastic only 6 months ago, and now plastic's everywhere, and thank goodness for it. But then again, somebody has to advance those researches into sustainable plastics and recyclable plastics, which is growing. But I think green will be, increasingly a big share, and the FT is, increasing its coverage of green issues and the climate. It's fascinating. We had an interview with Emmanuel Macron. Sorry to divert a bit, but another video you could watch on the FT website, where he talks about this green agenda and how what people, this pandemic has taught everybody, we're all panicking because it's hit us. And the green climate change thing hasn't quite hit us yet, most of us. In some countries are really feeling it. But in Europe, hasn't made a massive difference to us yet. And he's sort of saying, don't wait until we have a climate crisis like the pandemic in order to change everything overnight. Let's try and change it slowly, now, before it's too late.
Well, a fantastic sentiment. More comments pouring in from FT readers. Darren Everard on LinkedIn, hi Darren, says engineering in the UK is starting to return to some level of normality, which is great news for jobs. Well, very good to hear that. We are big fans of the engineering sector. We also have a comment from FT reader Dolphin23, becoming a regular dolphin on our discussions, who says it'd be interesting to hear how many banks are still not distributing bounce back loans. He is waiting for one to come through. The scheme is open until November, so plenty of time perhaps for the bank to agree. But if you are having problems accessing support, we still have a few minutes to go of today's broadcast. Do let us know. We also have a comment from Jenny G on LinkedIn, who asks, what can executive boards and managers learn from the COVID-19 crisis? Well, Andy, when it comes to what boards are learning, I mean, I think there are so many lessons, but I mean, one of which is, the way that we're all going to be working in future, because definitely the move to home working, more remote working is going to be a trend that carries on. It's not something that I think we're going to snap back and all suddenly be pelting back to the office in coming weeks and months. And obviously the financial challenges of managing the fallout from the pandemic, possibility of reshaping the workforce, sadly, in redundancies when we get the easing off of the furlough scheme later this year.
Yeah, I think home working is new Hotdesking, isn't it? I mean, is anyone going to be sharing a desk for the next year or two? I'm not sure. So I think that's changed. I think resilience is another big thing. I mean, it's really hard to, most businesses succeeded by being very lean and sort of buying the cheapest and selling the fastest. And this pandemic's taught that you can't always rely on those international travel networks. Maybe you need some capability, maybe you need some little bit of fat, as a cushion at the same time as well. So I think resilience will become a bigger issue. Whether shareholders are willing to sort of pay for that resilience when they forget about the pandemic in a year or two's time, we shall see. But certainly, sadly, the job loss point you make is very valid. And I think, retraining as well, and reskilling. Can you redeploy people into some of these new areas that you're having to deal with rather than, get rid of them? That would be what I would hope would happen.
Brilliant. Well, there's still time to comment on any of those issues if you're watching live and you would like to. I've had a comment from Richard Jolly on LinkedIn. Hello, Richard. He says, we're a live streaming company working on location. Now we're live restreaming online calls from remote participants, adding quality and value to them. For example, pre-recordings, graphics, manually cutting between callers, calls within calls, moving callers between rooms from our dining room table. Well, again, this is another example, Andy, of an industry. I mean, you just have to look at the Zoom share price. You know, it wasn't really a thing back in February, and now it's just become a part of everyday working life for millions of people.
Yeah, can I confess that until late last year, I hadn't heard of Zoom. Seems remarkable for such a clued up guy like me. But you know, yeah, I mean, it's come from nowhere, and sounds like your chap there is doing some really interesting stuff with it. You know, because again, you assume everyone knows how to use this, but what he's saying is you can add value even to the conference call by hiring somebody like them to help you operate it.
Yes, well, I found sending people messages offline whilst the live calls are going on can be a way to liven things up, but that's a very dangerous habit if you get it wrong. Now, I'm going to end with a really good point from David Burnham on LinkedIn. Thanks for writing in, David. He says, what does the future look like for the 9 to 5, 5 days a week office? Well, I think this is a really interesting phenomenon. I say this as somebody who took a few days off a couple of weeks ago and had to deal with the sort of ridiculousness of putting an out of office message on my email as I attempted to have a bit of a digital detox for a few days, because of course we've all been out of the office for blooming ages, and then saying that you're kind of like you're not around because you're on holiday seems a bit futile, because like nobody can go everywhere. But how do you think, Andy, this will change in the future? Are we going to move towards a 7-day working week? They're already talking about relaxing Sunday trading restrictions in Britain, which would be a really big thing if that happens. Or do you think that as normality, or what will become the new normality, eventually returns, the 5-day working week with fixed hours will come back?
I think it's tricky, especially for small businesses. I think that's an issue that larger businesses can cope with quite easily, and there will be the day will be staggered. And I mean, there's a classic at the moment. Lots of people are in the office on a Monday and not on a Friday. Well, some of those people might just not be in on a Friday and a Monday, or they'll come in on the Friday but not the Monday, because what you really want to do is smooth your workforce throughout the week and between the hours of say 7 and 7. Challenge is, if you're a small business with 4 or 5 people, that's a lot harder to do, isn't it? You really want people to be in the office when they can. I know that we've not got long left, and I think our colleague Isabel Bowick did a big Q&A on this only yesterday, which is probably still on our website. So if you want a full answer, we can defer to her. But things will definitely change on that score. But it's a challenge for smaller companies of how to manage it.
Well, thank you everyone around the world for joining us today on this discussion. I'm Claer Barrett, FT's personal finance editor. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm @ClairB. And Andy Bounds, helpfully, is @AndyBounds on Twitter. We'll tweet out some of the articles and the videos that we have mentioned during this debate. We'll also share them afterwards on LinkedIn. If there's a comment that we haven't got to, we do look at the comment streams after we go off air. If there's anything that you want to tell us that you think we should be covering in terms of how the FT looks at small business coverage of the pandemic, then do get in touch on the bottom of the article or via the live chat streams. We hope to be joining you very soon for the next FT Business Clinic. Until that time, goodbye from us.